Hello again. So we talk a lot on my website and on this channel about writing a scientific manuscript and how you need to go about doing that. But what we don't talk very much about or haven't talked about yet is how to then pick where to submit your manuscript. So what we're going to cover in this video is a couple of different tricks and tips that you can use to decide which journal to publish your scientific manuscript in. Hi, I'm Casey Butler from Butler Scientific Communications and welcome to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you get more videos like this one in the future, and enjoy this video on how to choose a journal for publishing your scientific manuscript. When I wrote my first paper, everything about the process was really stressful to me. Not only was writing the paper stressful, figuring out what to put in each section, how to organize it, but also at the end trying to decide what were the best journals to use to publish this paper. And just like the manuscript writing process itself, this was something that I felt very thrown into without any idea of the best ways to go about choosing the best journal for my publication. And now that I work with a lot of different graduate students across fields, I see also just how stressful it is when the wrong journal is chosen at the beginning, and those rejections that come in because this journal doesn't fit with what you're trying to publish or isn't a good match for your work can be really heartbreaking and can really add to the stress of publishing your manuscript. So what I want to cover today then is some simple ways that you can use to try to choose the best journal or journals for submitting your work so you can try to maximize your focused efforts for your submission, as well as reduce some of that added stress of unnecessary rejections from journals that didn't quite match with your work. So the way that we're going to do this is first I'm just going to give you a couple tips for brainstorming a list of possible journals for your submission. For these initial steps, we're not going to worry about picking the best journal right away. We're just going to focus on populating our list of possible journals. Then in the second step, I'm going to show you how to take that list and narrow it down to the best possible options for your work. Let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is choose from a list of journals we cite often in our paper. And so if you've already written the body of the paper, this becomes much easier because you should already have at least the preliminary reference section populated. Now, if you haven't written your paper yet and you're still trying to decide your journal, that's perfectly fine. What I recommend you doing instead is looking at one of the last papers published from your group on this topic or papers on a similar topic, okay? What you do here then is you're going to look at your reference list and you're just going to make a note of every journal that you cited and how many times you cited these different journals. This is going to be a great starting point that's going to show you the similar research to what you're doing and where that research is published. So this is a great starting list for possible options for publishing your paper. Next, point number 2, we're going to look at the most common or most popular journals in our field. This is actually not so hard as it seems to find, and what I recommend doing is just going to Google and typing list of journals in and then filling in your field. And so as you can see here, by doing this you do get a list of some of the most popular journals and most common journals in your field, and it's usually a very long list. Google does a good job of getting you a large selection of possible options here. And so what you can do is just take these options, write them down, add it to your list of possible places for your work. Another thing to note here is when you do this search, the first links that pop up are actually often these extended lists of journals in this field, and they are going to have the different impact factors listed for each of these different journals. And so this is a good idea, a good thing to save for when we go to the next step of starting to rank the different journals to decide where we're going to submit our paper. The third option for brainstorming your possible journals is to use an online tool such as janebiosemantics.org. And so JANE stands for the Journal Author Name Estimator, and it is an online tool that will give you possible options for journals where you could submit your work, and this can also help you narrow down your list. All you need to do is go to the address that I have linked here below, copy in the current title or running title that you have now for your work, and it's going to populate for you a list of possible options of where similar work is going to be found. So you can use this again as another way of finding some different journals maybe that you didn't think about when you looked at just ones in your very specific field. As an added bonus, this Jane Biosemantics tool is also good for helping you find possible referees for your work if you have to list possible different reviewers. And finally, it can also help provide you with similar articles to yours that you can use for citations in your work. Okay, so now by this time, you should hopefully have a usually fairly extensive list of possible places where you can publish your work. And so now what we're going to do is work through how to narrow this list down to help find the best places for us to submit our work. And so step number 4 here, one of the first things you should try is ranking these based on impact factor. I know that the impact factor is not always the most useful tool for determining the relevance of a journal, but it is a useful tool for determining how stringent they're going to be in their selection process. And so this is going to help you decide which journals are maybe bigger long shots than some of the others. So if you remember back to when we did that Google search a couple of minutes ago, looking for the different journals in our field, there should be a link here somewhere that is going to give you the journals in your field and their impact factors. And so you can use this list to help find those impact factors, and then you can rank your possible brainstorm list by impact factor so you have this rough idea of maybe how difficult it's going to be to get into some of these different journals. The next thing that I want you to do, and because this one takes a little bit more effort, I do the impact factor ranking first. I want you to check the aims and scope of these different journals. And so hopefully now, after doing the impact factor ranking, you might have an idea of some journals that you're not going to be applying to right away, or some that you might save for a later submission option. And so here, take some of the ones that you think are in the range that you estimate is the range of what your work will fall into, and look up the aims and scope of each of these journals. And so this is also a fairly easy thing to do. You just take the name of the journal, type it into Google, and follow it by aims and scope. And Google will find you the journal's aim and scope page. It is going to tell you exactly the type of work that this journal is looking for, exactly the type of work that it wants to publish. And what you want to do is find journals that have an aim and scope that match the aim and scope also of your paper. Okay, you want your work to be a good fit for the journal that you are submitting it to, not just to have a journal with a good name or with a good impact factor. Because I can promise you that there are going to be journals out there with a similar impact factor, a similar relevance, maybe not ones that you thought about, but will be a better fit for your work than trying to convince an editor of a journal that doesn't quite fit. Trust me, the editors have seen it all. They're going to know when you're going to do this, and it's just going to waste both your time and the editors if you try to submit work where your work does not match the aims and scope of the journal. By now, by doing this aims and scope exercise, you should have been narrowing down this list even more to possible journals that you can submit to, hopefully by crossing out some ones that are just not going to be a good fit for your work. And so now what you should do is, when you have this much narrower list, scroll through some of the articles in that journal and look at the types of submissions that this journal is publishing, okay? You want to look at the work that these different labs are doing that are publishing in this journal and see if the work that you are planning to submit matches what is being submitted there. For example, things I want you to look at when you're going through this process is see what types of studies this journal is trying to publish, and then see if your work and the scope of your work matches the types of studies that they want to publish. The next thing that I want you to look at are the types of experiments that people do when they get their work published in these papers. Do you have the same types of experiments? Are you doing the same type and amount of work that some of these other labs are doing to get them published in this journal? The next thing to look at is the breadth of experiments that these different papers are doing. What is the breadth of work that is covered by this paper? For example, are these papers covering a very narrow field-specific topic and doing very narrow field-specific experiments, or is this a very broad-ranging paper that has a lot of different experiments from a lot of different fields or subfields. You want to make sure that what you're trying to submit is going to match the breadth of work that this journal is trying to publish. Next, we're going to start looking at the reach of these papers. So when you're reading these papers, how broad is the scope of the conclusions that these papers are drawing? Are the papers that this journal publishes very focused on the field and people in field, and therefore their conclusions are rather narrow and tied to the field itself? Or are these conclusions very broad-reaching and impacting a wide range of people? This is often an indicator of also impact factor of the journal. Usually the higher the impact factor, the broader the reach of the conclusions and the scope of the paper. So this is something to keep in mind, and you want to make sure that your results and what you're trying to publish is going to match with this breadth of scope. And another way that you can look at this is by looking at how broad of an audience this work is targeted to. Is what is being published here generally understandable to a wide audience, or do you need to be in field and field specific to understand the work that is being done and being published in this paper? Okay, so hopefully you have now narrowed down your list pretty significantly to journals that you think your work might fit in. I usually recommend at this stage to find maybe 3 to 5 different journals that you would be happy publishing your work in. The next thing I want you to do is to list those journals by how difficult you think it will be to publish in those journals. Okay? Here you are going to want to work towards submitting to that highest level journal that you think your work will qualify for. And in doing that, you are going to make sure that you write your paper or tailor your paper and your cover letter to that highest level journal. The reason this is important is, like I briefly mentioned before, the higher level journals are generally going to require a broader scope, a broader range, a broader reach of the type of audience that you would be able to attract with this paper. And so by writing to this highest level top journal, you're going to make sure that you reach that higher level and that broader scope. Whereas if you write to a more narrow field-specific journal, you already hinder your chances of getting into those higher level journals. Whereas the opposite is not actually true. A paper that is highly accessible to a broad audience is still suitable for publication in a field-specific journal, but a field-specific paper that is accessible only to a field-specific audience is not suitable for publication in a higher level, broader reaching journal.